I'm Mike Mahoney from Elite Podcast Academy, and today we're going to talk about why you need a podcast release workflow. Implementing a podcast release workflow is probably the best thing you could ever do for your show. It allows your podcast production routine to become more efficient by helping to save time, remove wastage, and cut out unnecessary work to allow for your podcast to improve and grow. All very important things for you to have. While there are endless benefits to establishing a podcast release workflow, we're only going to discuss the main reasons why you should implement a workflow and how that will help to improve the quality of your show and create more time for growth opportunities. The first thing you're going to get is efficiency. For 15 years, I have used the Getting Things Done system of time management. This system is all about having things in writing to avoid forgetting them. This is why I immediately created a podcast release workflow. The GTD system recommends checklists for repetitive tasks to avoid forgetting key steps. And this is how my own podcast release workflow is set up. There are multiple reasons to consider using a workflow, and one of the first is that it creates massive efficiency. Workflows help streamline and automate your podcast production. They reduce errors and they increase your overall efficiency. By understanding exactly what each step entails and the purpose behind it, you can identify unnecessary steps in your podcast release workflow that can be removed to make it more efficient. Laying out your podcast production in steps can also help you to find the most efficient order of these steps and what should be done first or last. Now, it's going to save you time. Once you have greater insight into your workflow, you can determine what activities are actually necessary and which ones can be eliminated. Taking the time to identify and eliminate redundant tasks has many benefits. Rather than wasting time on a low benefit task, you can focus on what's really important. As your workflow becomes more efficient, you will create more time for yourself, which will give you time for new opportunities. Now, as you save time during the production process, you gain time to grow your listener base or even to monetize your podcast. Every minute you save is another minute you have to work on growing your podcast and reaching your goals. Now, you're going to see improved productivity. Creating and releasing a podcast takes up a lot of time. Depending on how much editing you do to an episode, this is a daunting task to undertake. Saving time means increased productivity. If you can spend less time doing repetitive work, you can take the time you save and use it elsewhere. Rather than wasting time doing menial tasks, you can give more time and attention to important things. As your podcast release workflow gets perfected, it becomes a well-oiled machine with all its specific parts that handle only what is necessary. With such a smooth process in place, you get a lot more done, increasing production output and even overall output in your day. The workflow also allows you to see the critical processes at every point, enabling you to identify problems and bottlenecks as they occur so you can adjust and improve the workflow with each cycle, monitoring end-to-end performance throughout and determining how efficient you really are being. Now, you're also going to reduce mistakes. Every repetitive process is prone to mistakes happening. This is why the GTD process recommends checklists for all repetitive processes. You reduce the number of mistakes when you religiously follow a checklist. One of the crucial aspects of a successful release of a podcast is that it must have provisions to answer all possible questions that arise when deciding on a task. It needs to answer important questions like what truly needs to be done, what's the goal of each step, how long should each step take to perform, who else is involved in the process, and what should happen after completing each step. Your podcast release workflow follows a sequential order, ensuring that all steps are completed correctly, especially in areas that are prone to human error. It helps to ensure that checkpoints are met before moving on to the next step. The workflow provides transparency of the process, allowing you to find and correct mistakes long before the actual release, preventing them from occurring in the first place. You could also learn that there's parts of your show you could outsource. One of the biggest reasons that a workflow is important is because it gives you much greater insight into your podcasting process. As such, you can break down each step. You can start to identify tasks that would be best assigned to others with the right skills to handle the task with the most efficiency. Delegating repetitive tasks can help to further speed up the process, and it creates a domino effect where each step flows into the next. When you begin assigning parts of the podcast workflow to others, each person gets more specialized in doing the assigned tasks, and that makes that process even more efficient. As an example, every episode Yogi's Podcast Network releases gets pushed to social media on the publish date. By having a virtual assistant handle the social media push, it is one less thing for the producer of that show to do. This frees the producer up to come up with good topics. Then there's automation. Using automation in your podcast release workflow offers a plethora of benefits. First, it reduces the number of tasks you would otherwise do manually, freeing up more time to work on other important non-repetitive tasks like growing your listener base. This allows more tasks to get completed in the same amount of time. Now, automation ensures that specific jobs are not forgotten or completed out of order, and that prerequisite tasks are completed successfully. Oftentimes with automation, decisions that were previously determined by people can now be made by the workflow based on rules that can be made to represent human input, streamlining the process to prevent the extra back and forth that is often associated with human decision making. Now, it's also going to bring about consistency. Automating your workflow helps to generate a more accurate and consistent product in the end. Strong workflow management correlates with the consistency of what is created at the end of it. Through consistency, your audience is sure to have a consistent quality show that is released on schedule and as promised. When your production process runs smoothly, you will have episodes produced on time for publication, and any mistakes will be caught early on, allowing for a quality episode to still be created. The more efficient your workflow becomes, the more consistent your podcast episodes will be, accurately and faithfully serving your audience with the content they want. So here's an overview of our workflow here at Yogi's Podcast Network. Clearly, the first step of the podcast release workflow is to record the episode. You need to do everything you can to ensure that the sound quality is the best it can be during recording. This helps with efficiency by saving you time during the editing process. Garbage in, garbage out is a commonly used term, and it applies here. You get garbage when you record like garbage. Editing the show becomes a personal preference thing. If you're extremely anal and want everything to sound like a pre-recorded television show, you will edit out every little nuance, like and ah, from your episode. You will be sure that any crosstalk is eliminated. You might even rearrange some of the dialogue to make sure it flows better. Here at Yogi's Podcast Network, we handle this differently depending upon the show. Example, for the nightly rant, we don't do very much editing because the idea is to capture conversations. And by doing an extreme amount of editing, that messes with the conversation itself. We only take out obvious goof-ups and noises that creep in. When we have a new episode, we always run the files through iZotope's RX6 to fix any issues that may have crept in during recording. As stated, we do our best not to allow there to be things like that creeping into the show, but RX6 does an excellent job of fixing any issues. I always run breath control, debleed, deplosive, and dialogue isolate. The end result is an episode that sounds like a professional radio show that was broadcast live. Now, after you record and you edit, and that's done, it's time to add the intro, the outro, and any other commercials or audio that needs to be added in order to complete the episode for publication. I always keep an MP3 and WAV copy of all of the extra audio for a show. I also have a template for each show's episodes that I use to make the process smoother. I will tinker with the placement of the intro and outro so that I get the desired result with the sound, fading in and fading out at the right place. Now, in order to publish your episode, you're going to need an MP3 copy of the audio. Take care to create your MP3. I like to compile it in mono rather than stereo. It not only reduces the file size, but it also makes the most sense. It's a dialogue-driven medium. It does not require stereo in order to sound good. Now you're going to need to tag your episodes. It's a very important step. Podcasts that are not tagged wind up with some very strange issues. Look at the image on the screen and you're going to see immediately the problems with not tagging. There's no cover art to help it stand out from other podcasts. The The title of each episode is just the file name and description is missing from all but one of the episodes. When you don't add ID3 tags, it makes your podcast look unprofessional, and it makes it very difficult for your audience to listen to or want to listen to your content. At Yogi's Podcast Network, we use a software called ID3 Editor to tag our shows. We highly recommend this software because it makes it so very easy to tag your show. There are obvious tags that every podcast should have, like title and description. But after that, it gets a little fuzzy. You'll hear all kinds of advice about this. Based upon a study of top podcasts in iTunes, there's only 8 tags that really matter. Title, artist, album, year, genre, cover art, feed, description. You're going to have to upload it to your host. In order to distribute a podcast, you need to host it somewhere. You have many choices, including self-hosting. Most of us use services like Libsyn, Anchor, or Simplecast for our host. At Yogi's Podcast Network, we strongly recommend Simplecast for your podcast hosting needs. Get to know the interface of your podcast host. Some will automatically push your episodes to social media. They'll all update your RSS feeds with the latest episode. Be sure to carefully fill out the submission form each and every time. Include all of the appropriate information for your episodes. Then it's time to schedule the release. One feature all hosting services have is the ability to schedule the release of your episode. Obviously, you're going to set this up to match your promised release schedule. This should be part of your podcast release workflow. Now you're going to publish that episode. Rely on your host to publish your episodes on the date and time you chose. Be sure to have a piece of your podcast release workflow include checking that the episode was published on time and with the information that you provided. Next, you're going to want to promote your episode. It's a topic on its own, but for the purposes of discussion here, you need to focus on promoting the episodes as you release them. There are many strategies that exist for doing this. Yogi's Podcast Network pushes our episodes to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We take time to nurture our social media following on all of the platforms. We provide them with great content so they stay interested in what we're doing. By having an efficient podcast workflow, you gain time required to promote your show on various platforms available. You can focus on what is working and what is not working, doing more of what is working and eliminating or fixing what is not working. Always keep refining your workflow. The key to having an amazing show is to continually refine your workflow. Now, as I mentioned, you're going to be more efficient when you have a good workflow. You'll be able to separate the tasks you should be doing from the tasks others should be handling. You'll refine your entire process by continually checking back to see what's working and what is not working. That is why a podcast workflow is so important. It makes everything else so much easier. If you want to know more about podcasting, head on over to elitepodcastacademy.com, and don't forget, for great content, yogispodcastnetwork.com. Thank you.